Introduction to this section. As you progress through the study of listing contracts, it is essential to recognize that the type of listing agreement selected by a property owner or broker shapes the entire working relationship between the parties. In earlier lessons, you learned the legal foundations of agency, fiduciary duties, and the nature of real estate contracts. Those principles now connect directly to the practical tools used to market and sell real property. Every listing agreement defines the broker's authority, the expectations of the seller or buyer, and the circumstances under which compensation is earned. Understanding the different types of listing arrangements is vital for every real estate professional because each agreement serves a different purpose, depending on the client's needs, the market conditions, and the level of representation involved. This chapter explores how open listings, exclusive agency listings, exclusive right-to-sell listings, net listings, buyer, tenant representation agreements, transaction broker agreements, multiple listing provisions, and pocket listings function in real estate practice, with detailed examples to help you connect the concepts to real-world scenarios. Overview of listing agreements. A broker may represent any principal party in a real estate transaction, whether seller, buyer, landlord, or tenant. An owner listing authorizes a broker to represent the owner or landlord in marketing the property for sale or lease. The most common types of listing agreements are the exclusive right to sell, the exclusive agency listing, and the open listing. A net listing, though technically a type of compensation structure rather than a distinct listing category, appears in practice, but is restricted or disfavored in many states because of ethical concerns. On the buyer-tenant side, representation agreements mirror these same structures, allowing for exclusive agency, or open relationships. Another important aspect of modern brokerage practice is the multiple listing service, which is not a separate type of agreement but a provision within listings that allows brokers to share information. Finally, pocket listings and office exclusives introduce unique legal and ethical considerations that licensees must fully understand. Open listings. An open listing provides a seller with the highest degree of flexibility but the lowest degree of broker commitment. Under an open listing, the seller is free to hire multiple brokers at the same time while also maintaining the right to sell the property independently without paying a commission. The broker, who is first to produce a ready, willing, and able buyer, becomes the procuring cause and earns the compensation. Because the seller retains the right to sell on their own, brokers operating under open listings often invest less time and fewer resources in marketing efforts. For example, consider Karen, who experienced a negative transaction with a prior agent and feels more comfortable selling her home independently. She places a for sale sign in her yard and provides flyers with basic property information. A broker later contacts her with a qualified buyer and prepares a written offer that Karen accepts. Karen pays the broker a commission because that broker produced the buyer. However, had Karen sold the home directly to her neighbor without broker involvement, she would owe no commission to anyone. In Arizona, open listings are legal but uncommon in residential practice because they provide little incentive for brokers to invest time, money, or marketing resources. Exclusive agency listings. An exclusive agency listing provides a middle ground between full exclusivity and complete openness. Under this agreement, the seller selects a single listing broker to represent them, and that broker holds the exclusive authority to market the property. However, the seller still retains the right to find a buyer on their own without owing a commission to the broker. This structure protects the broker from competing with other brokers, but still allows the seller to avoid paying a commission if they independently procure the buyer. For example, Marka and James must relocate quickly and want professional representation, so they hire a listing broker. Their exclusive agency listing gives the broker full authority to market the home. But if Marka and James find a buyer through personal connections, no commission is owed. In practice, exclusive agency listings are less common than exclusive right-to-sell agreements because they still create uncertainty about compensation. In Arizona, exclusive agency listings must contain an expiration date, and although oral agreements may be recognized, best practice and risk management dictate that these agreements be put in writing. Exclusive right-to-sell listings. The exclusive right-to-sell listing is the strongest form of representation for brokers and the most widely used listing agreement nationwide and in Arizona. Under this agreement, the listing broker earns a commission regardless of who brings the buyer. Whether the buyer is procured by another broker, the listing broker, or even by the seller themselves, compensation is owed as long as the transaction occurs during the listing period or within any applicable protection period. Because this agreement provides the greatest protection of a broker's efforts, it is the most effective at encouraging the broker to invest in professional marketing, photography, advertising, open houses, and negotiations. For example, James and Adrian hire a real estate agent to list their home and include a clause naming James's mother as an exempted buyer. If she purchases the property, they owe no commission. However, if any other individual submits an offer, whether through the MLS, signage, online marketing, or private contact, the listing broker is entitled to compensation. In Arizona, an exclusive right to sell must be in writing and must contain an expiration date to be enforceable. Net listings. A net listing is an arrangement in which the seller sets a minimum acceptable amount they must receive, and the broker retains anything above that amount as compensation. Although this may seem straightforward, it presents a potential conflict of interest because it encourages the broker to undervalue the seller's property to secure a better margin for themselves. For this reason, net listings are illegal or heavily restricted in many states and viewed as unprofessional by most real estate organizations. Consider a seller who needs at least $350,000 from their home to pay off debts and relocate. If a broker sells the house for $380,000 and the minimum was $350,000, the broker keeps the $30,000 difference. This structure can easily tempt unethical behavior and misrepresentation. Arizona does not prohibit net listings outright, but most brokers avoid them entirely due to the risk of violating fiduciary duties and the appearance of self-dealing. Buyer and tenant representation agreements. Just as sellers can hire brokers to represent them, buyers and tenants may enter into representation agreements that establish a fiduciary relationship with the broker. These agreements may be exclusive agency, or open in structure. Although exclusive agreements are the most widely used because they allow the broker to focus diligently on locating property without concerns of being bypassed in compensation. Under an exclusive right to represent agreement, the broker earns compensation if the buyer purchases property during the agreement period, regardless of how the property was found. For example, a tenant relocating from Tucson to Phoenix hires a tenant rep broker to locate office space. Even if the tenant identifies a building online, the broker still earns compensation if the tenant signs a lease during the representation period. In Arizona, exclusive buyer agreements must be in writing to be enforceable, must contain an expiration date, and must clearly state how compensation will be earned. The ADRE also prohibits unlicensed assistants from performing license acts, including collecting rent or negotiating terms. Transaction broker agreements. A transaction broker agreement establishes a non-agency relationship in which the broker assists both parties in completing the transaction without providing fiduciary duties to either. The transaction broker does not represent the buyer or the seller, but instead facilitates communication, coordinates paperwork, and ensures that the transaction progresses smoothly. Arizona allows transaction brokerage, but licensees must carefully follow disclosure rules to avoid accidentally creating agency. For example, a seller lists their home for sale by owner and asks a licensee to help draft the purchase contract and coordinate the escrow timeline. If the licensee acts as a transaction broker, they must make clear in writing that they do not represent either party and are not providing fiduciary advice. These agreements must contain an expiration date and clearly define the broker's role in the transaction, including compensation terms. Multiple listing agreements. A multiple listing is not its own type of agreement, but a clause within a listing contract that authorizes the broker to place the property in the multiple listing service, MLS. The MLS is an organized system in which brokers share listing information, offer cooperative compensation, and expose the property to a broader pool of buyers. When a seller signs an exclusive right to sell listing, the MLS clause typically grants the broker the authority to upload photos, property details, and showing instructions. In Arizona, MLS participation is governed by local realtor associations, and member forms, such as the Arizona Realtors Listing Agreement, cannot be distributed to the public due to federal copyright protections. Pocket listings. A pocket listing occurs when a property is not advertised on the MLS, either because the seller opts out or because the listing is marketed privately before being placed on the MLS. Pocket listings raise serious ethical, legal, and antitrust concerns because they limit market exposure, may reduce competitive offers, and can appear to benefit the agent more than the seller. In Arizona, pocket listings are legal, but require written seller authorization. Agents must disclose the potential disadvantages, including reduced exposure, compromised market data, and heightened fair housing risks. Moreover, MLS rules typically require listings to be uploaded within 2 business days, unless the seller signs an opt-out form. For example, a seller agrees to list their Scottsdale home exclusively within 1 brokerage office to maintain privacy. While this may appeal to some clients, the reduced exposure may limit potential buyer competition. The agent must document the seller's decision, ensure compliance with MLS rules, and avoid discriminatory marketing practices. Review summary. This section explored the main types of listing agreements used in real estate practice, including open listings, exclusive agency listings, exclusive right to sell listings, and net listings. Each structure reflects different levels of representation, broker commitment, and compensation certainty. Buyers and tenants may also enter into exclusive or non-exclusive representation agreements, establishing fiduciary duties similar to those in seller listings. Transaction broker agreements allow brokers to assist parties without forming an agency relationship. Multiple listing clauses enhance market exposure through the MLS, while pocket listings restrict exposure and must be carefully managed to avoid legal and ethical issues. Understanding each agreement prepares the real estate professional to properly guide clients, manage risk, and comply with state-specific requirements, such as those enforced by the Arizona Department of Real Estate. Discussion. Explain why exclusive right-to-sell listings remain the most widely used form of agreement in Arizona. Answer. Exclusive right-to-sell listings guarantee that the broker will earn compensation if a sale occurs, regardless of who procures the buyer. This compensation certainty encourages brokers to invest in marketing, open houses, professional photography, and negotiations, ultimately benefiting the seller through increased exposure and competitive offers. Why are net listings considered risky or unethical? Answer. Net listings create a conflict of interest by encouraging the broker to maximize their profit rather than the sellers. This dynamic can lead to undervaluation, misrepresentation, or advice that prioritizes the broker's interests, violating the fiduciary obligation to place the client's interests first. How does a buyer representation agreement improve professionalism in a real estate transaction? Answer. A buyer representation agreement clarifies expectations, creates a fiduciary relationship, ensures loyalty, and obligates the broker to act solely in the buyer's best interests. It also provides legal clarity regarding compensation and duties, reducing misunderstandings and increasing confidence in the professional relationship. How can pocket listings create fair housing concerns? Answer: pocket listings limit exposure to a narrow group of buyers, which can inadvertently exclude protected classes and restrict equal access to housing opportunities. Even without discriminatory intent, limiting marketing channels can cause disparate impact and raise legal and ethical concerns. Closing remarks. Understanding the different types of listing agreements is fundamental to responsible and effective real estate practice. Every agreement you enter into shapes your legal obligations, your compensation rights, and the client's expectations of your services. Whether acting as a traditional listing agent, a buyer's representative, or a transaction broker, the structure of your agreement influences the entire transaction. In Arizona, strict adherence to ADRE regulations, fair housing laws, and professional standards is essential to protect clients, maintain trust, and safeguard your license. Mastery of these listing types prepares you for the dynamic reality of real estate and ensures you operate with clarity, integrity, and professionalism.